Who were the tribes that came to the aid of Deborah and Barak in fighting Sisera? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Judges on Walking Through the Bible. The glory of his cross. Today we're going to be discussing Judges 5 verses 12 to 21, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Judges chapter 5 verse 12, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Judges chapter 5, beginning at verse 12. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, sing a song. Arise, Barak, and lead your captives away, O son of Abinoam. Then the survivors came down, the peoples against the nobles. The Lord came down for me against the mighty. For Ephraim were those whose roots were in Amalek. After you, Benjamin, with your peoples. From Machir, rulers came down, and from Zebulun, those who bear the recruiter's staff. And the princes of Issachar were with Deborah. As Issachar, so was Barak, sent into the valley under his command. Among the divisions of Reuben, there was great resolve of heart. Why did you sit among the sheepfolds to hear the pipings for the flocks? The divisions of Reuben have great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and why did Dan remain on ships? Asher continued at the seashore and stayed by his inlets. Zebulun is a people who jeopardize their lives to the point of death. Naphtali also on the heights of the battlefield. The kings came and fought. Then the kings of Canaan fought in Taanach by the waters of Megiddo. They took no spoils of silver. They fought from the heavens. The stars from their courses fought against Sisera. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. That ancient torrent, the torrent of Kishon. O my soul, march on in strength. In our last lesson, we began our look at the Song of Deborah. We said that the song itself can be subdivided into three parts, with what we just read being the second part. In the first part of the song, Deborah gives praise to God for what he had done for Israel in providing deliverance for Israel in their battle with Sisera. She said that before he did this, Israel lived in fear of her enemies, but now, because he raised her up and delivered Israel, that through him, Israel could now live in peace. By referring to how God had always been the deliverer of Israel, going back even to Egypt, she is telling Israel that they know how to remain in God's favor, which is not by going after other gods. Coming to part 2, which begins in verse 12, we see how God delivered Israel from Sisera. Deborah begins this section by relaying to us that it is she who stirred up the heart of Barak to lead the armies of Israel. Up until that point, Barak, like many of the rest of the men of Israel, had largely been absent in their duties. They should have been encouraging Israel to return to serving God, but no, they shirked their responsibility, so God raised up Deborah, a faithful woman, to accomplish his purpose. As to who came down to assist Deborah and Barak in battle, we know from chapter 4 that Barak was to raise up 10,000 troops from the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali. But here in chapter 5, we find that other tribes joined in as well, though likely in lesser numbers. We find that the tribe of Ephraim and Benjamin participated, which should make sense because it was from their border that Deborah sat and judged the people. Issachar also participated, for as we discussed in chapter 4, the battle took place on what would be their land. And Machir is mentioned, which represents the tribe of Manasseh west of the Jordan. Now this might sound strange or out of place because from our study of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua, we learned that the descendants of Machir inherited land east of the Jordan River. What we need to understand, though, in all of this is that the genealogies of the tribe of Manasseh, as given in Scripture, are quite confusing. From Genesis 50, we learn that Manasseh only had one son, Machir, and thus all the families of Manasseh descended from Machir. Thus, in some places in Scripture, Machir is used to represent Manasseh or parts of Manasseh. In the context of Deborah's song, though, Machir is used to represent the tribe of Manasseh west of the Jordan, because in verse 17, Deborah says that Gilead remained where it was, with Gilead being the region occupied in part by the half-tribe of Manasseh east of the Jordan. So what we have here is that the most noble and brave in the northern tribes of Israel west of the Jordan came to the aid of Deborah and Barak in battle. What tribes didn't? Well, first we find that the tribe of Reuben didn't, though they seemed to show sympathy for this conflict, but chose to remain where they were in their pastures. Gilead, which would represent the tribe of Gad and half-tribe of Manasseh, stayed where they were, as did the tribes of Dan and Asher, content to live on as they had before. I find it interesting that the entirety of the tribes east of the Jordan chose to remain outside the fray of this conflict, for if you recall from Joshua 22, these tribes set up an altar west of the Jordan as a reminder to those tribes who dwelt in Canaan proper that they too belonged in the congregation of Israel. Yet here, when tribes west of the Jordan needed their help, these 2.5 tribes were nowhere to be found. This speaks volumes of how far Israel had sunk in that time, where national unity was at a low. No mention is made of Simeon and Judah, but perhaps that's because they still have the Philistines to deal with, which were a constant pain in their side. We don't know for sure, but their absence is noticeable, even though the omission is not explained. Verses 19 to 21 describe the battle itself, giving us more detail than we had before. The kings of Canaan, meaning the armies of Sisera, came to fight in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They had expected to take bounty, but did not do so, for they were defeated by the Lord. How the Lord did this was not only by the armies of Israel, but using the waters of the Kishon River to sweep some of the armies of Sisera away. Recall back in Joshua's day that God sent hail from heaven. Well, here he used the waters of the river to kill the enemy. God doesn't need to use miracles to accomplish his purpose, though he sometimes does. Natural phenomenon will do just fine. This great victory would allow Israel to march on in strength, for the Lord was on their side and would fight for them, just as Joshua had told them, as long as they obeyed God. We'll conclude the look at the Song of Deborah, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Judges chapter 5, verses 22 to 31, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.